We see the incidence of sick days. Hey, what the heck is a sick day? And being able to use sick days as vacation days if you're not sick. Why are they not just vacation days? I don't get this, by the way. The Family Leave Act, which I am all over, being able to have time away when a new life comes into a household. I'm not sure I like how some of it is postured or administered, but I'm all over that, in part because as a dad, I miss being able to do some of that, but also because we see societally the effects of that parenting, if you will, early, the bonding that comes. And then when you're a dad of teenage daughters, the bondage that is coming. Okay. Anything else that labor unions have given us? Do we have health insurance tied to our employment today as a function of labor unions? Not all economies have health insurance tied to their employment. In fact, it's kind of unusual in today's world. As it turns out, it's not an effect of labor unions. It's an effect of competitive markets. So as we were coming out of World War II, and we weren't out of it yet, but you know, the end was near. It could be seen, but there was this huge ramp up still of the military-industrial complex, tremendous amount of money being spent, the tremendous need for workers, and at the same time, a wage ceiling had been put in place by President Roosevelt. So wages could not go above a dollar amount, a certain dollar amount, for any given type of position. And we had a shortage of workers because so many of our workers were overseas fighting, right? So how do you get workers if you can't pay more? How do we compete for workers? Well, I'm going to give some extra time off. I'm going to give some health insurance benefits. I'm going to find a way to give you some pension in the future, which was not restrained within the wage ceiling that existed. That's where we got health insurance connected to our employment. And it just, for some reason, somehow fit nicely enough, long enough, that it stuck. And we're just now starting to decouple that. My sense is probably over the next 20 years, maybe 10, that will largely decouple. We're already seeing some of that, portability of plans and such, which 20 years ago, there's no such thing as portability of plans. There was no COBRA. And now we have some of this. Okay. Is a labor union membership a marketable good in the market?
Depends.
How so?
Depends on how the individual feels about union and union dues.
So you want to separate it from marketable good versus marketable bad? Well, there are both, right?
Yeah.
There are marketable bads. I think cigarettes are a marketable bad. But frankly, the way we as economists think about them, they're a marketable good. Good not having a normative consideration, it's just means a marketable thing, right? Labor union membership is a marketable good. They have some really kind of interesting connotations to it. If you go to work for certain employers in certain states, you must purchase the good, right? You've got to become part of the union. Which means that there's some friction that's introduced, and you might even say it starts to take on some of the effects or similarities to a public good. But we can't really go quite that far with it. Okay? So think about the labor union membership as being a good for which there is some quantity and there is some price, there is some supply, there is some demand, such that we can find some Q star and some P star if given a QS equaling a QD equation. And that lets us then think about what these are. And then if we think about the number of workers in a marketplace, let's assume that we have a P star for low-income workers, low-skilled workers, and let's say it's 10. And we have a Q star of equal to 12,000. But then and that's also for a low-income or low-skilled worker. And then we have a P star for highly skilled worker unions and a Q star for that same highly skilled type of worker. And let's say that this, because the wages are so much higher for the highly skilled, maybe this, instead of being 10, is 100. But there's only 700 of them in a market. Could we begin to make some inferences as to which one is more profitable, which one's more interesting to the union organizers? This one, I think, is going to end up with 120,000 in revenues, right? $10 in membership, let's say each month, times 12,000 members. This one, at $100 in membership fee each month, 700 workers, I think, is that 70,000? And this also helps tell the story of why we end up seeing more elastic demand workers unionized. Because this dynamic is not uncommon. There are so many more of them because of their substitutability, so many more of them, that the business of unions that they become party to or a part of is simply a higher revenue business. If you're going to go into business, Charlie, which are you going to go into? A high revenue business or a low revenue business?
High revenue.
Well, we're going to hope, right? You're an economist, for heaven's sakes. So this is part of that whole story as well. Is that a hand? No, that's just a yawn.
Sorry.
You were just getting ready for the yawn, and I misunderstood it. Okay. Yeah, Joel?
Well, if that one's a higher revenue, aren't there costs, different costs associated?
Probably are. Probably are. And we can think about, you know, the profit from one to another, but it's most likely that the profitability is greater here than it is here. Yeah, most likely. I think that the people that run the AMA might argue against that, because the AMA is extraordinarily profitable, right? I mean, phenomenally profitable. They have a foundation the likes of which some governments would aspire to.
What is this?
The American Medical Association, they have, because they're a non-profit, right? So some unions are actually for-profit entities, but the American Medical Association, as a non-union union, is a non-profit entity, so it can't spin its profits out to shareholders. So it accumulates them, and it does so in a foundation, a private foundation. It's a private foundation. It just has extraordinary amount of money. In fact, more so than many small nations that we would think about, or even modest sized nations. Let's think about what happens when a union moves into an area, and then let's think about what happens when strikes take place. And Jim, I'm going to probably be mostly abstract and theoretical here. If you want me to try to give some numbers to it, I'll try to, but I think that what I'm going to show is so common to the things we've been seeing, I don't think you're going to need them, but if you do, we'll try to figure something out. Okay? So let's assume we've got a marketplace for workers, and we'll say that these are moderately skilled, not high, not low. Maybe this is electricians. Maybe this is sheet metal workers. Maybe it is technicians that repair high-tech hospital equipment. Okay, I think those all kind of fit within the same kind of income spectrum and the skilled environment. Such we have wages, we have labor, we have some labor supply, and some labor demand. And so this is a pre-union environment. And there's a W star and an L star. we understand this very well at this point, right? And there's probably an LS and an LD relation that's governing all of this. And a labor union steps in and would like to unionize these workers, and then is successful in doing so. Such that now we have a market of these moderately skilled workers that is unionized. So this was pre-union, and I'll say now that it's now become non-union. But a union sector has also developed. When that union sector developed, so there was the choice to unionize amongst the workers. There was a movement to create some collective bargaining agreements among the employers, right? Almost certainly the total wage bill per worker rose, and that was part of the promise of the union, right? And we know that when that rose, I'll try to telegraph these over. When it rose, we saw something up here in terms of this new W star. So let me kind of change the position of this. So the new W star was higher than the old W star. What happens to this labor supply? Some of them are now part of this labor supply, right? Because there were, let's say that these were electricians, there were 3,000 electricians in the market, or 3,000 people trained and skillful enough to be an electrician. Some of them now are in the union shops, and they are not necessarily a number that is the whole number that we have. They're a lesser number, right? There's only some of them. But they have a higher wage, and we know they have a higher wage, not only because of this decrease in the number of them, but also because the union bargained for higher wages for them. The union had to justify the union dues, and then some, right? Some of them couldn't work for the union because the employers they were working for now couldn't afford that many workers at that high wage, right? So if that was created, what happens over here? This labor demand, by the way, isn't necessarily for union or non-union. The labor demand is for electricians in this case, or the moderately skilled worker. So the labor demand doesn't change, does it? What happens to this labor supply? It's going to shift, right?
It'll shift up and to the left.
But you know, you say that, Ben, and I think what you just told me is that we're going to then end up in a scenario, I'll call it these primes, we're going to end up in a scenario such that these workers have higher wages also, but they're not unionized. Does that make sense? How come? I agree with you. How does it make sense? Yes?
Is it because the market receives the benefit of having a union in it?
There's some of that. There's some of that. There's kind of a more fundamental labor-ish reason. Think about the law of one price. So here we are, Stephen, you are one of these electricians. And you were in this generalized market before, you and Charlie both, okay? And you both had a similar skill set. You were good electricians, okay? And now you're working over here for a higher wage. Charlie, do you also want a higher wage?
You bet.
Sure. You might be willing to accept a wage that's not quite as high as Stephen's. Maybe it's Stephen's minus some of the union dues and or other things that you have to experience, okay? Think of this kind of in compensating wage differential space, all right? So you bet you would. You can see this structurally happen, such that the wages of both rose, or the total wage bill of both rose. Holly, was that a hand? No, okay, fine. And if you have numbers and equations, you can model this nicely. You can identify, if you know that this number was 300, and now we've got 70 of them here, it stands to reason this one's probably 230, right? Or something like that, because there's still probably 300 of them working in the market or something like that. So that's an effect. So the presence of a labor union, even when it doesn't unionize all the workers of a skill set, tends to drive the wages of all the workers of that skill set. Not expressly, not literally, but virtually. The labor union member and the union that's organized them can require from the employer a higher wage because we're going to give them more training. There's an apprenticeship program before they become journeymen. We're going to give them some vetting. You don't have to worry so much about hiring them. If you need another journeyman electrician, just call the union hall. We'll send 5 of them to you. So it's kind of like a placement service. They give a lot of service that the employer might appreciate. They also give a few headaches that the employers don't so much appreciate. And we know that because every time a union tries to organize in today's economy, there's a lot of push against it. In fact, we've seen this very recently with respect to right to work states, of which Utah's one. What does right to work mean? Yeah.
So it means that if there is a union present, that you don't have to join it.
You know, that might be part of the detail and definition. It's not what I was thinking about. There's a more commonly understood way to think about this. But that might be part of it. So if I'm in a right-to-work state, I have the right to work or not, and the employer can employ me or not. There's no contractual obligation. Even if there is a union contract, there's no requirement to keep the employee. There are some states that are not right-to-work states, such that if there's a union contract, then that contract supersedes other state